Here we are back again to talk about the roots of the mecha genre. Last time we went over the granddaddies of mecha mayhem starting out in the 1960s. From television powerhouses like Astro Boy to landmark pieces of cinematic animation like Ghost Ship, the 60s were really a time where mechs got their footing. And if that decade was the birth of the mecha genre, then the 70s could be said to be the rise of the super robot. Of course, the end of the 70s would actually herald the arrival of real robot shows like Mobile Suit Gundam. But before that, there were a whole lot of giant robots with crazy powers defending the Earth. This video is only covering pieces of media released between 1970 and 1974, as the decade as a whole is stuffed to the brim with tales of giant death machines. So follow along as we take a look at every piece of mecha media I can scrounge up. Of course, I will definitely miss some here and there, as some of these shows are sort of obscure, and even online databases tend to skip over some here and there. If you know of a mecha show that I miss or just want to hear about, please feel encouraged to comment below and let me know. And of course, a show being talked about in this video does not mean it won't get its own specific video later on down the line. With all that being said, let's take a look at the super age of super robots. Before our first entry, just let me say that about half of the things on this list are made by Go Nagai, the creator of Devilman and Mazinger Z, so it's kind of a celebration of his additions to the industry this episode. Along with that, a lot of these shows were created by Toei, and the last time I dared to show a clip from anything by Toei, they filed a full strike on the channel. So when something's produced by Toei, you'll see a lot of stills instead of actual clips. So just a heads up, a lot of these entries I just had to use stills for, because I'm not gonna risk getting like 8 strikes and having the channel be taken down for this video. So let's go. Released in October of 1972, Science Ninja Team Gatchaman, or just Gatchaman for short, is a 105-episode action romp that follows a team of 5 superheroes. But retcon, you say? I thought they were science ninjas, not superheroes. Well, they're both, and that's cool. The show was created by anime legend Tatsuo Yoshida, and produced by his company Tatsunoko Productions, and heavily incorporates themes of conservation and environmentalism. While working for the International Space Organization, the ninja team fights off the ever-present invasion of the alien terrorists known as Galactor. The team is led by Ken the Eagle, who, along with other members Joe, Jun, Jinpei, and Ryu, pilot the airship God Phoenix. I watched a few episodes of the show in preparation for this video, and the first thing I need to mention is the action and framing of the scenes is really good. The fight in episode 1 between the ninja science team and Galactor terrorists is visually exciting, and it just astounds me how fast animation as a medium evolved in the late 60s and early 70s. The individual team members all have an interesting dynamic. In particular, I like how Ken and Joe argue about how they should take on the terrorists, with Joe wanting a more guns blazing approach. Ryu is a big strong dude, and Jinpei is the kid of the group, and then there's Jun, who has a really cool looking pink outfit, and this show, let me tell you, it is obsessed with showing you upskirts of her. The mecha in Gatchaman are your Super Sentai style giant monsters and others of that ilk. In fact, a lot of the designs remind me of Godzilla. In the first episode, they fight a giant mech turtle that goes around stealing uranium. Before we move on, I do want to mention the multiple adaptations that we had in the West. First, it was made into Battle of the Planets, an 85-episode show that threw Gatchaman into a blender, added a robot dog, and called it a day. Battle of the Planets has a Western cult following for sure. In fact, there was actually a reboot planned and announced back in 2016, but we haven't really heard anything about it for a couple of years. Second, Fred Ladd, the man who brought Gigantor and Astro Boy to the United States, adapted Gatchaman into a fairly faithful translation called G-Force that ran for 85 episodes. And then finally, we did get a fully translated DVD release of the entire series back in 2005, courtesy of the company ADV, and then that run was later bought out by a company named Sentai Filmworks and reprinted and distributed on Blu-ray. So yeah, Gatchaman has a very faithful full adaptation that has been released and is pretty easy to find, and it's actually still really good, so go check it out. Next up is a show called Astro Ganger, a 26-episode series created by Knack Productions, the team that would later bring joy to the world in the form of the notorious Chargeman Ken. Airing in 1972, Astro Ganger has gone on to have a so bad it's good reputation. Despite its humorous legacy, Astro Ganger was actually the first super robot show to ever air in color, though it would be quickly followed on that front by the next show on our list. Astro Ganger follows the story of Kentaro, a half-alien boy who fights off invaders with the help of a giant sentient robot, Astro Ganger. While Gatchaman had impressively smooth animation, you can really feel the years on this one. The movement here is really jerky and honestly less fluid than some of the shows we talked about from the 60s. I did watch multiple episodes of Astro Ganger to write this, and well, it was pretty hard to watch. Astro Ganger has that sort of old quality where it's kind of hard to sit through. However, take a bong hit and the weirdness of the show makes it really funny and enjoyable. Anyway, Astro Ganger also kind of looks sad a lot of the time. I do think it's interesting that he is sentient and has thoughts and can feel pain. It definitely sets the show apart from some of the other super robot shows that would come later. Despite my personal feelings on the show, Astro Ganger actually had pretty far reach, airing in places like Spain and Italy. It was apparently very popular in the Middle East as well, where it was localized as Jonker. At the end of the day, this one really wasn't for me, but if you're in the mood for something so bad it's good, and have seen things in a similar vein, then perhaps Astro Ganger will be for you. And let's not forget this show does have an important legacy as the first super robot show to air in color. Released only a few months later was the absolute giant robot classic, Mazinger Z. Based on the original manga by the visionary Go Nagai, Mazinger Z was produced by Toei and had an impressive 92-episode run. Perhaps the most notable thing about Mazinger Z is that it may be the first piece of mecha media where the giant robot is controlled from within, from a removable cockpit, a trope that would go on to be reproduced time and time again. The Mazinger is an incredibly powerful machine, though it's not the only mech in the entire series. There are actually multiple in episode 1. Personally, my favorite thing about this series is just how crazy Go Nagai's source material is. The guy has a certain style, and whether it's his Mecha series or Devilman, you always know when you're watching his work. The main villain is the very ominously named Dr. Hell, who has created an army of giant robots that he wants to use to take over the world. The head of his army is the half-man, half-woman Baron Ashura, whose design is as imposing as it is silly. As a mecha series, it really doesn't pull any punches either, as the main character's sister and grandfather are killed in order to give our lead Koji some motivation. Koji's a pretty edgy character, as he's introduced riding a cool motorcycle and just almost causing a car accident. The animation of Mazinger Z is really smooth and still fun to watch, and the design of the giant robot itself is incredibly cool. I was never really one for the old style smooth giant robots like Tetsujin 28, and while Mazinger shares a lot of similarities with that 60s design, its coloring and detailed head unit do a lot to modernize the less detailed aspects. Mazinger Z would actually get an English dub produced in Hawaii in 1976, where it would be released in a bunch of local theaters. That dub is surprisingly faithful to the source material, and as far as I can tell, it was a pretty big hit among the Hawaiian theater community. And they even had a 10-foot tall Mazinger statue that they would display at the showings. And while only 52 episodes were ever dubbed for that Hawaiian run, it actually made its way over to the Philippines, where it then got so popular and kicked so much ass that they went ahead and just redubbed the rest of the series. Then, in 1985, Mazinger Z was localized for American television by 3B Productions as Tranzor Z. Of course, they did the standard thing of changing names and storylines to suit the target audience of young American children, and in a relatively cynical business move, they cut the series off at episode 65. Despite having the rights to localize all of Mazinger Z, they never finished the final 20 or so episodes because 65 was all they needed for American syndication. Mazinger would go on to spawn many sequels and spin-offs, and while the original 92-episode series is admittedly a bit of a slog, its legacy stands for itself. Next up is Machen Liner number 11, Henshin Seo, which roughly translates to Hellhound Liner number 11 Transform, a 50-minute long animated feature that was originally shown at the Toei Manga Festival in 1972. The story is an adaptation of Hiroshi Sasagawa's 1963 manga, Maken Goro. The film was directed by Takeshi Tamiya, who would remain a prolific director and producer for Toei Animation for multiple decades. In short, Machen Liner is a pretty straightforward action-adventure about a boy fighting off an alien invasion. It has some interesting elements like the fact that the ubiquitous scientist father that is always in old robot shows does not invent a giant mecha. Instead, he turns the family dogs into a squad of killer cyborgs. The aliens in Machen Liner are of the insectoid variety, and the film does a good job of showing their designs, especially in the opening. Animation here is really fluid, and there's great use of color during the opening as the futuristic city is bathed in sunset. By the way, the dogs in this show are absolutely adorable, even when they're reduced to a metal exoskeleton later on. Also, they can talk eventually. This movie gets pretty crazy the longer it goes on. It definitely holds your attention with how much is constantly going on and how fast it moves. An early joint effort between two studios that would later become Studio New and Nippon Sunrise, two of the most important players in mech anime, Zero Tester is a 1973 space adventure show that ran for a total of 66 episodes. Notably, this show is the directorial debut of Ryosuke Takahashi, who would later go on to create shows like Bottoms, Blue Gender, and Gasaraki. As far as I can tell, Zero Tester has never been officially translated or released in the West, so everything that I found was from a fan subber, and even then I could only find episode 1. There is a listing on Amazon for Zero Tester Volume 1 that claims to be an import from 2018, but yeah, on sale it's $134, so no thanks. There's also a second volume that's available for a similar price with the last half of the show. So hey, if anyone in the audience really wants to watch Zero Tester and has a few $100s to burn, there you go. As for the rest of you, here is what I thought of episode 1, which is available on YouTube. In the world of Zero Tester, the Earth is suffering from an invasion from an enemy known as the Armanoid aliens. These aliens are super evolved brains in jars that have come to Earth to steal human bodies because they're pretty tired of being pickled. The show's tone is decidedly adult right from the opening. No child mech pilots to be found here. Speaking of mecha, this show has a lot of them deployed by the Armanoid, and it's the job of the tester pilots to fight them off with experimental weaponry. Zero Tester has a pretty interesting premise to go along with the adult tone, and the visuals of the aliens are pretty spooky. Honestly, this show would probably scare me as a kid. You thought Freddy vs. Jason was cool? How could it be cooler than a crossover between an Earth-defending mech and a demon man? Go Nagai always struck me as the kind of person who really just had fun with his creative properties, so I'm not surprised about the multiple crossovers that he produced. The film was released in 1973 and runs for about only 45 minutes. As far as where this movie fits into either series continuity, it doesn't. Especially for Devilman. Trying to put where this would take place just kind of makes my brain hurt. Before I talk about the plot, let me say that I have loved Devilman ever since I saw that terrible dub of the 80s OVA back in college. But I have a really hard time getting past the 70s anime Devilman design. He's just such a doofus. That's part of the reason I've never really seen the 70s anime, and there's no excuse because his original design in the manga is awesome. The dastardly Dr. Hell is still causing a ruckus with his army of robot monsters, but this time the fighting awakens the sleeping harpy demon Shireen. The demon clan awakens and is then controlled by Dr. Hell, who's apparently so powerful he can take over demons with like zero effort. Akira Fudo and Koji Kabuto meet, and while Akira is not impressed with the Mazinger as it does not have the ability to fly, the two develop a respect for each other after a rad motorcycle race. Devilman and the Mazinger then team up to fight off Dr. Hell's robots and reseal the demon clan. Overall, I actually ended up watching the entire movie, and while I only have minimal context for Mazinger, it is pretty cool seeing the mishmash of Nagai properties. Honestly, if you want something fun to put on, the brisk pace and fan service might be right up your alley. Also, why is Devilman huge in this movie? Is he huge in the 70s show, or is that just so he can be as big as the Mazinger? Another production from Tatsunoko, Neo-Human Casshern, also known as simply Casshan, is a 1973 series with an interesting legacy. This is one of those shows that they try to reboot about every 10 years or so, with the last attempt being Casshern Sins in 2008. I guess we're due. Unless you count manga adaptations, in which case Casshern R literally just started its run on September 16th of this year, and is surprisingly the first time Casshern has been adapted into print media. The original 35-episode series follows Tetsuya Azuma, a man who has just turned himself into an android that retains his human intelligence in order to hunt down robots that have taken over the world. Neo-Human Casshan begins with the protagonist's scientist father, of course, creating androids meant to work in hazardous material disposal. He has the noble goal of making the Earth a cleaner place for all humans, but one of the themes of Casshern is the danger of technological growth outpacing human understanding and control. One of the androids is prematurely awoken in a very Frankenstein way by a bolt of lightning, and this causes it to go bonkers and throw a dog through a window. The show actually really likes killing that dog too, because later he gets electrocuted and they have a whole ass dog funeral. But it's alright, because not only does Tetsuya turn himself into the avenging android Casshern, but the dog Lucky is also transformed as well. And if there's one thing I can say about this series, it's that having a robot dog that transforms into a fighter jet is awesome. Out of everything that I have talked about today, I think Neo-Human Casshan is the most impressive and interesting to me. Basically, it has all the pros of Gatchaman when it comes to the animation and design, because Casshan and Frender look sick. Casshan fights against the leader of the androids, who's basically Robot Hitler from the intro. And it lets the team put their full creativity on display with a multitude of crazy robot designs. And if what I've said doesn't convince you to give this or one of its later adaptations a look, well, even Shinji Mikami of Platinum Games credits Casshern with being a huge inspiration behind the art style and movement of Vanquish, one of the coolest games ever made. Next up is a really strange and creative entry, 1973's Babel II. This is a 39-episode anime series released by Toei that stars normal, everyday school kid Koichi Amano. Well, he is normal until he starts getting dreams about the biblical story of the Tower of Babel, and it turns out he's actually the reincarnation of an ancient alien entity from 5,000 years ago. This series also had an OVA adaptation in the 90s, and then another one in the early 2000s called Babel II Beyond Infinity. Babel II fights the evil being known as Yomi, a descendant of the first alien that controls most of the world's governments and has nearly endless resources. In order to help Koichi fight, he has 3 entities that he can control: a giant pterodactyl, a shape-shifting Black Panther, and a giant robot from the ocean called Poseidon. This show is pretty violent right off the bat, and even opens with slaves being whipped while building the Tower of Babel, which ends up being a supercomputer that Babel was trying to use to contact his homeworld that subsequently explodes. Personally, I really love that ancient aliens theme, especially when combined with biblical stories and themes, probably why I love Shin Megami Tensei 4 so much. Overall, Babel 2 looks pretty adult. I mean, there's a lot of death and killing, and a surprising amount of blood for this time period, and beyond that, the violence isn't super goofy, it's actually really grounded and realistic, at least in the opening. This one is just so out there with its general premise that I might actually watch it all the way through. And if you're like me and this show piques your interest, well, it's good to know that there are multiple modern versions of this if this one proves to be a little long in the tooth. Another Go Nagai adaptation, Mazinger Z vs. the Great General of Darkness, takes place directly after the conclusion of the Mazinger Z anime, and serves to introduce the audience to both Great Mazinger and his enemies. Another movie with a 45-minute runtime, Great General of Darkness has a brisk pace and a strangely apocalyptic setting. The Great General himself and his 7 war beasts rise from beneath the Earth's surface and launch attacks on the world's major cities, with only Mazinger Z being powerful enough to stop them. Mazinger Z gets super fucked up in this movie. By the end, it's pretty much falling apart. When the mysterious Great Mazinger is introduced, it immediately displays how much more powerful it is than the old model, with its sleeker design and bigger weapons. This movie is a really great piece of giant monster fiction, along with being an impressive mech special. They even use the iconic Godzilla roar at one point. The 7 beasts are giant half-robot, half-organic creations that have human faces and are all really cool looking. Go Nagai's imagination was in full swing here. The one criticism I can level at this one is that the actual introduction of Great Mazinger is pretty rushed. He literally just kind of shows up and saves Koji's bacon, with his only explanation being that he's basically Mazinger Z's brother. That backstory is obviously explored in much more depth in the Great Mazinger series, along with the whole Mecha Empire and crazy giant beasts, and this one is not intended to be watched standalone. You really need to have seen Mazinger Z and want to see the rest of the series to get the most out of it. With that being said, the animation and general filmmaking in this one is really beautiful, and Koji has the sickest drip ever. Another 1974 robot show created by Go Nagai, Robo is a fan favorite among classic anime enthusiasts. While Mazinger Z is probably Nagai's best known work, and Devilman is his darkest, Robo is often lauded as both the most badass and the most fun. Centered on a team of pilots and their combining giant robots, the Robos 1 through 3 fight off the subterranean dinosaur empire, a people who evolved from Earth's dinosaurs instead of apes. But being forced to live underground for millions of years has really pissed them off, so now they emerge to take over the world. Yeah, so at this point, Nagai isn't really getting any points for creativity when it comes to his general plot developments, but of course his style and charm are ever present. For one, if you took every Go Nagai MC and put them in a police lineup, they would all end up in the slammer because he really loves this particular design. 2, Robo starts off pretty ridiculous, like, it has the most dramatic soccer match ever and a guy being thrown 100 feet through the air by a judo move. This one really does operate on the rule of cool. The show also starts with the getters already being a thing that the leads are working on, so at least you don't have to go through the whole discovering a giant robot in a secret lab trope this time. As for the designs in the show, they might be the silliest of Go Nagai's villains, but there is something oddly charming about dinosaur people piloting giant robots. Getter Robo would go on to have a multitude of sequels in both manga form and through more anime series. In fact, a Getter Robo arc just aired a few years ago, so the series is far from forgotten. On top of that, there is currently a live-action Getter Robo in production that is set to be released in 2025 for the franchise's 50th anniversary, and this series is cited as one of the main inspirations for a personal favorite of mine, Tengen Toppa Gurren Lagann. Getter Robo is a big series with a really big legacy, and one that I absolutely plan on looking at more in depth in the future. Finally, our ultimate entry for the early 70s, another Go Nagai property and direct sequel to Mazinger Z. Great Mazinger ran for 56 episodes starting in the fall of 1974, and it tells the continuing tale of Koji Kabuto and the giant titular robot. However, with Dr. Hell being defeated at the end of the original series, Koji and his allies now fight against the ancient Mecha Empire and their giant war beasts. The beginning of this series continues on directly after the events of Mazinger Z versus the Great General of Darkness, though it's important to note that Great Mazinger continues after the anime's version of those events. The most notable change here is that Koji is actually absent for most of the series, having taken up studies in America after the emergence of the Mecha Empire. Great Mazinger continues the series' insane design for the war beasts, something that I personally really like about it. The Great Mazinger itself is a much sleeker design than the original, though I do wonder how Japanese fans at the time felt about this show, pretty much just replacing the main character with someone who's basically his cooler older brother. Great Mazinger never really lived up to its predecessor's ratings, but it was a hit in its own right and spawned, you guessed it, an incredibly successful line of toys. In fact, by the time that Great Mazinger had shown up in the English version of the original series Transor Z, he had already been introduced to the West via a line of toys called Shogun Warriors. That Great Mazinger toy looks fucking sweet, by the way, but it's like $600 on eBay. Honestly, I think I'd rather have that than the YouTube plaque one day. That or just the 10-foot tall Mazinger statue behind me, that'd be awesome. And there we have 11 pieces of media from the years of 1970 through 1974. The early 70s really were the golden age of the super robot, but there would be even more of that particular genre to come later on. Believe me, we're far from done. This is also the time where Toei would rise to prominence with its many mecha shows and its thirst for adapting every piece of robot manga it could find. Much of this episode was also a celebration of Go Nagai. Truly, if you were a mecha fan in the 70s, his works were pretty much inescapable. Beyond Nagai, things like Gatchaman and Babel II really stood out to me as pieces of media I actually want to take the time to watch. Next time we will be looking into the latter half of the 70s, a time where giant robots were still incredibly popular and the subgenre of real robot would have its infancy. If I missed any pieces of media from the early 70s, then please let me know down below, as I do think that it's important to keep the conversation going when it comes to these old works. Thank you for taking the time to watch today, and I certainly hope a race of subterranean dinosaur people don't conquer the Earth before the next video. Hey, and welcome to today's end card. Before I get into a few things, let me thank my channel members, aka Batosai, Argan, Griever, Ashar, Khazar. Sorry, I messed that one up. Brian Sanchez, D. Mells, Daniel Johnson, Deader V. Gert, Joe Castellanos, Joe Cavazos, John Lamb, Johnny G, Canto 20, McLean Nugent, Mr. Smash, Trey Hardy, Zappa Slave, and Video Gamer 75. Thank you all so much for the membership. It is very much appreciated. I'm glad this video got out when it did. It's always fun to, look back on old shit like this, so that's part of what I wanted to do on this channel, and it's been a couple of months since the last Mecha Through the Years video, so here it is. Next time it will be the latter 70s, and then when we get in the 80s, there's definitely going to have to be videos that are a single year, because there are certain years in the 80s where 10 shows came out that are Mecha. It's crazy. The 80s are nuts. When we get there, it'll be weird. All right, so coming up the rest of this month, I do have a Halloween episode planned, so keep your eyes peeled for that. And then after that is going to be Gundam Age. I think that video is going to be kind of long. I have a lot to say about Gundam Age. That show's really weird. It has a lot of good things and bad things, so that's coming up too. Keep an eye out also over on the gaming channel, which you can find a link to at the bottom of this video's description. There is a new LP started. We're doing Alan Wake for the rest of October because it's spooky. So see you over there if you like that sort of content. And y'all have a nice day.